The letter had been sealed for 23 years. It had survived fire, flood, and the deliberate cruelty of a woman who had spent 2 decades pretending it did not exist. It had been buried beneath floorboards in a crumbling Devonshire cottage, wrapped in oilcloth and bound with a ribbon the color of dried blood. And on the morning of the 14th of October, in the year of our Lord 1819, it was carried into the King's Bench courtroom in London by a young man whose jaw was so remarkably, so devastatingly similar to the late Duke of Ashford's that 3 barristers forgot their arguments entirely. His name, he announced to the assembled court, was Edmund Carew, and the Duchess of Ashford, seated in the gallery above in her black mourning silk, looked down at his face, that face, and the world went silent before it swallowed her whole. She fainted without a sound. Let us begin, as all great sorrows do, at the beginning. The late Duke of Ashford, Gerald Fitzwilliam Carew, 7th of his name, had been by every outward measure a man of impeccable standing, tall, broad-shouldered, possessed of a countenance that painters had begged to immortalize and poets had wept over. He had married Lady Helena Ashbourne at the age of 26, a match arranged with the cold precision of 2 noble families consolidating their fortunes. Helena had been beautiful, accomplished, and utterly without warmth. Their union had produced one legitimate heir, Lord Philip Carew, and, so the world had believed, nothing more complicated than the occasional social obligation. What the world had not known, what Helena had known and buried alive in the deepest chamber of her heart, was that Gerald had loved another woman first. Her name was Mary Carew, no relation by blood, only by the quiet, unofficial ceremony Gerald had entered into before his betrothal to Helena had been formally arranged. She was a clergyman's daughter from Devonshire. She was gentle, earnest, and brilliant in the way of women whom society overlooks entirely, and she had been with child when the Duke's family had arrived, white-faced and remorseless, to inform Gerald that his alliance with Mary Ashbourne was an impropriety of the most unacceptable variety, and that it would be dissolved. Gerald had wept. Mary had not. She had simply looked at him with those grey, steady eyes, pressed his hand once, and said, in a voice that did not tremble, "Then go, but know that what we made together shall outlast every arrangement your family can contrive." She had been right. Edmund had grown up knowing exactly who his father was. Mary had not kept the secret from him in the sentimental manner of mothers who wish to protect their children from pain. She had rather told him the truth with the same grey-eyed steadiness she had shown Gerald all those years ago. She had shown him the letters, 17 of them, written in Gerald's distinctive sloping hand, full of ardent declarations and, crucially, explicit acknowledgment of the child Mary carried. She had shown him the unofficial register of their private ceremony. She had said, "You are his son. You have as much right to that name as any man born in a proper bed. Whether the law agrees is another matter, but I will not have you doubt what you are." Mary had died the previous winter, her lungs surrendering finally to the cold that had plagued her for years in that draughty Devonshire cottage, and Edmund, now 23, with his mother's grey eyes and his father's jaw and a burning, quiet fury that belonged entirely to himself, had gathered her letters, engaged a solicitor of considerable nerve, and come to London to present his claim. Not to the dukedom, he was not a fool, and the laws of legitimate inheritance were not easily overturned. What he sought was acknowledgment, recognition, the rightful restoration of his mother's honor, and a portion of the estate she had been promised and denied. It was, his solicitor had assured him, an entirely reasonable claim. It was also, as anyone familiar with the Duchess of Ashford could have predicted, an act of absolute war. Before we go any further, if you are gripped by this story, if your pulse is quickening alongside mine, I want you to do something for me right now. Tap that like button below. It takes 1 second and it means the world to this channel. And if you are new here to the Duke's Lost Letters, please subscribe. We tell these stories every week, and I promise you, you do not want to miss a single one. Now, back to the courtroom. Helena Carew, Dowager Duchess of Ashford, was not a woman who fainted easily. She had endured the death of a husband she had never loved, the management of a vast estate, and 20 years of London society, with its serpentine gossip and its casual cruelties. She had, on 3 occasions, conducted conversations with women she despised while maintaining an expression of perfect composure. She was armored in the way that only women who have survived their own marriages can be armored. But she had not been prepared for Edmund's face, because it was Gerald's face. Younger, yes, unlined, undimmed by age and compromise, but unmistakably, undeniably his. The same strong brow, the same particular set of the mouth that suggested a man accustomed to saying difficult things calmly. The same hands, long-fingered and restless at his sides. When the smelling salts were brought and Helena was revived in the small antechamber adjacent to the gallery, the first thing she said, before her maid, before her son Philip, who had rushed to her side, before propriety could reassert itself, was this: "I always knew this day would come." Philip stared at her. He was 25, the new Duke, and until approximately 40 minutes ago, he had believed his inheritance to be secure and his family history to be uncomplicated. He was at present discovering that both beliefs had been catastrophically optimistic. "Mother," he said with careful, controlled fury, "who is that man?" Helena smoothed her black silk skirts with hands that barely trembled. She looked out the narrow window of the antechamber onto the grey London street below. She said nothing for a long moment that stretched like taffy between them, thin and agonizing. "He is your brother, or near enough to it. The distinction is legal, not moral." Philip sat down heavily in the nearest chair. The hearing itself lasted 4 hours. Edmund presented the letters with the calm, methodical composure of a man who has rehearsed this moment in his mind so many times that the emotion has been pressed out of it like water from a cloth. His solicitor read aloud Gerald's own words, ardent, specific, irrefutable, in a voice that carried to every corner of that courtroom. Women in the gallery pressed their gloved hands to their mouths. Men shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The scratching of the clerk's quill was the only other sound. When the Ashford barrister rose to challenge the authenticity of the letters, Edmund did something no one expected. He spoke for himself. "My mother," he said, addressing the bench directly, his voice low and steady. "My mother died in a cottage with a cracked window and a hearth that smoked because she could not afford repairs. She died knowing that the man she loved had acknowledged her and their child in writing, and that this acknowledgement had been suppressed by those who valued inheritance over honor. I do not come here seeking a title. I come here seeking the acknowledgement that was her due and was stolen from her. I come here so that her name may be spoken in a courtroom as what she was, a woman loved, a mother faithful, and a person wronged." The silence afterward was absolute. Even the Ashford barrister did not immediately rise. In the antechamber above, Helena Carew heard every word through the cracked door her maid had not fully closed. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, and her eyes very bright, and her countenance utterly unreadable. A tear, singular and furious, made its way down her powdered cheek. She did not wipe it away. The judgment, when it came 3 weeks later, did not grant Edmund the estate, but it did grant him something rarer, the court's formal recognition of the letter's authenticity and a written declaration that Edmund Carew was the natural son of Gerald Fitzwilliam Carew, 7th Duke of Ashford. His mother's name was entered into the record not as a scandal, but as a matter of fact. It was not everything. It was not nearly enough. And yet, the morning after the judgment was published, Edmund received a letter bearing the Ashford seal. Inside, in a handwriting he had never seen before, but somehow recognized, were 6 words. "Your mother deserved better than this." It was signed, Helena. He kept it. He did not know precisely why. Perhaps because forgiveness and acknowledgement are not the same thing, and yet both carry weight in the particular silence that follows a long war. Perhaps because his mother's grey eyes had told him, always, that truth, however late, however imperfect, is still worth carrying into the light. Friends, before I leave you today, if this story moved you, if you felt the weight of those letters, the cold of that Devonshire cottage, the impossible silence of that courtroom, please like this video and leave a comment below. Tell me what you felt. Tell me whose side you were on. And if you haven't yet subscribed to the Duke's Lost Letters, now is the moment. Every week we return to these drawing rooms, these courtrooms, these rain-soaked carriageways, and we ask the questions that history tried to bury. Some letters, after all, are never truly lost. Until next time.